Rain slashes the balcony glass. A silver tray clinks as someone jerks it, a folded letter slipping free and tumbling toward the gutter. Mid-air, the page flutters, one edge soaked by spilled wine, the scrawled word "forgive" barely readable, before the wind steals it down the alley. The terrace freezes. The wrongness of that lost plea hangs heavier than any silence, and nobody can say why the grip loosened. Glass beads gather on the railing, each drop tracking a slow spiral before bursting into a neat constellation on the stone edge. Mara lifts the tray back into its recessed slot with a practiced, steady hand, silver hardly warm from late-night service. While Jory, sleeves rolled to the elbows, wipes the drink ring from the marble table. They move through the terrace like dancers repeating choreography. Refill the carafe, fold the linen napkins into triangles, check the signal flag fluttering low above the courtyard. The rain drums a regular pulse on the canopy, a steady metronome against the hush. Downstairs, the kitchen staff shifts in their own rhythm. Clatter of pans receding into the distance, the sizzle of eggs coaxed gently by a new chef. Through the open window, the scent of citrus peels curling into steam winds up, reminding Mara that breakfast still has to be served on time. She glances toward the alley, where the letter vanished, just long enough to note the absence, not enough to give it breath, and then returns her attention to arranging the flowers that always go to the governor's study before noon. Routine, fragile as it is, keeps the terrace steady. The coffee machine sputters and settles while Lena slices oranges at the island. Mason is already at the door with his messenger bag slung over one shoulder. He lifts a hand, pauses, then drops it again as if he has something to say, and doesn't. "Kids' soccer game Saturday," he offers instead. Lena slides the oranges into a bowl and sets it beside the cutting board. "I'll make time," she replies, smooth, holding the knife in both hands as if she needs the weight. When Mason leans in for a kiss, she tilts her head away and pats his cheek anyway. "Just text me when you're on your way. We'll do dinner tonight." The door clicks shut and the hallway echoes with his footsteps. Lena thumbs open a message from Marco before the house is fully empty. "No news from you?" his bubble reads. She types, "I can't risk it tonight. The kids have a recital run through and I'm coaching the overflow, but I can't cancel." He replies with a single tisk and a photo that she barely glances at before closing the app and shoving her phone under a cookbook. "It's better this way," she murmurs to the silent kitchen, scrubbing cups with the back of her hand so hard her knuckles blanch. The justification repeats in her head. The secrecy keeps them safe. It keeps the household steady. And the words turn into a mantra as she packs lunches with precise motions, stacking grapes and sandwiches in shapes that make Tristan grin when he plucks them from the fridge later. Midday, Mason is home early. He walks in without knocking, carrying a stack of printouts. "Hope you don't mind," he says, dropping the papers on the counter and leaning in to kiss Lena before she can respond. The smell of stale coffee wafts from her sleeve. She's still wringing the dish towel. His eyes flick to the towel, then to her face, and he lifts a brow. "You okay?" Lena forces a smile, sinks her fingers into the dough she's rolling for the yoga class fun bake sale, and hums, "Just tired. Finished up a ton of volunteer stuff today." He nods, but the brow stays knitted. He settles at the island with the papers, and Tristan ambles in, hopping onto the stool. Mason ruffles his hair and glances at a sticky note on the fridge, the one reminding Lena about ballet rehearsal, then at Lena. "Dinner tonight? Maybe that Thai place on 5th? "We can do leftovers," she says too quickly, her voice higher than normal. When Mason frowns, she flips a notebook closed and swallows. Tristan throws his arms around Mason's neck, and Mason lifts him, grinning. Lena's shoulders tense, then drop as she slices through dough. The knives click twice more as she sets dough on the tray and peels her gaze from them, letting the timer on the oven tick loudly enough to drown out her pulse. Mason reaches for her hand, while Tristan wanders off with a toy car, and she lets him. His thumb traces small circles over her knuckles. "Talk to me," he murmurs. "I know when there's more going on." Lena doesn't pull away. The silence grows thick. She squeezes back, and the tension hollows out enough for a breath. She nods toward the counter. "I'm sorry it's been weird. Fundraiser stuff is just killing me." Mason nods, but his fingers don't leave hers. She lets the heat of his touch sink in, letting a tiny part of her feel the relief of not letting the lie slip tonight. Marco's message buzzes again in her bag. She feels the vibration and doesn't check it. Mason lifts his head, and the tension unspools when Tristan calls for her. "Mom, Dad, can you help me with this rocket?" They both lean toward the tiny plastic model. The scene shifts. For a moment, the household feels aligned, though Lena knows the price of that alignment is the new fracture inside her, widening with every careful word. Mason dragged the folding table into the kitchen, snapping the legs into place while Lena slid scrambled eggs from pan to plate. He tapped his phone, then shoved it toward her. "Planning meeting for Saturday. The Smiths want us over after the soccer game. I can't do that if you're already double booked." The fridge hummed. Lena set the kettle on the stove, fingers brushing the magnetic notepad stuck beside the calendar. There, between a grocery list and a reminder to call the plumber, was a tiny stack of sticky notes folded like origami birds. She peered at the top one. Tuesday's question mark. Wednesday's scribbled almost. She flattened a new note, wrote, "Thursday, 5:15 p.m. kitchen, are you okay?" and slid it back into the pile. The handwriting along the edge was only hers. The pile kept growing with every fleeting chance she didn't take. Mason swirled his coffee, looking past her shoulder. "Did you notice I left a voicemail? I said we should talk about the house meeting before it gets packed. You were gone when I called." She smiled too wide. "Work kept me late. Sorry." Her thumb hovered over the message bubble that popped up from Carter. "We can do Sunday," he typed. "Add 60. She tapped a reply, fingers steady. Carter's words read, "Did you tell him yet?" The message ping jolted her shoulder, a small explosion inside her chest. Not now. Not when Mason was rearranging his glasses case in the other room. She sent, "Need to go over the plans again. We'll call later. Opportunity?" The silence in the room felt heavy. Mason leaned back, eyes not leaving her. "I've been watching you for weeks, Len. Not in a weird way." He smiled to lighten it, but the room sat still. "Just, is there something we should be dealing with before we get stuck in this endless carpool schedule? You seem, I don't know, distant." She reached for the syrup bottle, then stopped. Mason's fingers brushed hers. The contact was an electric warning. The stack of sticky notes fluttered as a breeze from the open window hit them, scattering one across the counter. She bent to pick it up. "Wednesday. Maybe after the game, he'll notice." Mason's eyes tracked her movement, and he followed to the sink, rubbing soap into his hands. The bell on the front door chimed. Maya from next door stood there with a casserole dish, bright as ever. "Hey, thought you two might like this," she chirped over the threshold, oblivious to the tension. Lena accepted the dish, masking the tremor that ran through her fingers. Maya leaned in, whispering, "You guys still good?" Mason smiled and said, "We are now." The casserole became a prop for civility. a pocket of warmth that shifted the temperature in the kitchen just enough to let Lena breathe again. As Mason left toward the garage, he paused. "Tell me if you need to bail on Saturday. The kids can handle it." Lena grabbed his elbow, steadying the motion. "I'll be there," she said, and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, a question without words, acceptance without proof. She watched him slide out of the driveway, then went back to the table and added another note. Friday? No calm moment came. Silence won. The river of missed chances ran through her head again, one more stone tossed into an already turbulent stream. The door clicked shut behind his truck, and the house filled with the hum of routine. The truth sat unsaid, a low, steady pressure behind each breath. The kettle shrieked, then settled into a steady hum as Mason leaned against the kitchen counter, eyes flicking between the glowing clock and Lena's back. She rinsed another dish, letting the water run over her palms, the scrape of ceramic echoing in the too-quiet room. "Dinner again?" he asked, voice soft enough to stave off argument. "I thought maybe we could switch it up. Go get coffee? Sit on the porch?" Lena kept her gaze down. "Coffee sounds good. Later?" Her words slid past without meeting his eyes. She dried the plate with a towel, folding it over her fingers until the fabric felt knotted. He stepped closer, then stopped when she didn't move to the side. "I can't tell if it's me," he said, "or if you've got something else on your mind." "I'm tired," she offered, handing him the plate to stash in the rack. The motion was automatic, clean, a practiced deflection. "Work has been—" She stopped herself before she could say busy, and let the silence hang. He didn't push further. Instead, he grabbed a handful of the herbs from the counter, crushing them between thumbs and forefingers. The smell lifted into the air, bright and sharp. "You always know when to add just enough basil," he said, giving a small smile. "Maybe we should cook together this weekend, get the kids helping. No screens." Lena's jaw tightened. "Let's see how tomorrow goes," she said, avoiding the invitation to commit to a plan, yet letting the suggestion settle like a small stone in the bottom of her chest. She moved toward the pantry, opened it, and withdrew the cardboard box of pasta. A beat later, she wiped both hands on her jeans, breathed in the basil scent still hanging, and set the plates in the drain. Her reflection in the window looked tired, pale. She closed the cabinet door a little too hard, a sharp sound that landed between them. Mason didn't flinch. He went to the couch, picked up the remote, and without looking at her said, "I'll bring you coffee later. No pressure." She nodded once, no words, then turned, leaving the dim light of the kitchen to follow him into the living room. The air hummed with the unspoken. The small gesture, her agreeing to let him bring coffee, felt like a tiny rope tied between two cliffs. Enough tension for now, enough to keep him from calling the whole thing off. It wasn't truth, but it was a promise to stay in the same room. The kids barreled out of the living room, carrying a board game and a wave of noise that cut through the soft hum in the kitchen. Mason reached for a dish towel and offered it to Lena. Just an easy, old gesture from a decade of mornings together. She took it with 2 fingers, thumb brushing the cloth in a way that didn't actually take it. Words hung in the air. "We should sit down, figure something out." But she only rotated the cloth and put it back on the counter. Mason's gaze followed the towel, but he didn't press. He leaned on the island instead, watching her keep her back to him as she chopped peppers with slow, deliberate strokes that made the knife thud without rhythm. Her phone buzzed against the spice rack. She slid a finger across the screen, read the name, and the knife stayed suspended over a half-cut pepper. The text glared white. We can't keep pretending there isn't a cliff every time you walk away. I'm done doing this. Her hand twitched. The message stayed on screen, the words just sitting there while her body went through the motions of dinner prep. She didn't respond. Mason noticed her fingers stiffen, the way her shoulders lifted and dropped a fraction of an inch. But he said nothing. The phone went face down beside the stove when she set the pepper aside. A deliberate, quiet refusal to let sound come through. Kids want to draw after they clean up, Mason said, trying for something light. Maybe you and I can finish that pasta together? Later, she muttered, slicing the vegetables again. I'll stir when it's time. He reached for the pot handle to lift it to the burner, but his hand grazed hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she dropped her fingers into the sink full of soapy water and submerged them, leaving his hand brushing nothing but air. He kept his eyes on her face, searching, but the expression there had become an even, practiced neutrality. The way she exhaled when the timer rang, a small, sharp breath of relief, showed more than any speech. The kids returned, clutching crayons and laughter. Mason scooped the younger one into his arms and spun in a circle, making the others shriek with delight. Lena glanced over, her jaw tensing as if the joy around them amplified the quiet between her and Mason. She covered the pot with a lid and dragged 2 plates across the counter, the metal scraping brittle and high-pitched. She didn't look at the sticky notes by the coffee maker, the ones still clinging with reminders about confessing, about agreeing to a drive, about being honest. She stared at the wall where the light from the window outlined the list like a shadow of expectation. Mason reached behind her shoulder, fingertips brushing the edge of a note. He smoothed it down as if he could keep it uncrumpled. You want me to take the kids outside after dinner? He asked, voice steady. Sure, she replied, not looking at him. He paused a beat longer, then nodded and started gathering the plates. Mason left the kitchen the same way he came in, with small practical movements, nothing now to inflame the silence. Lena watched him go, the door clicking shut. And for the first time since the affair started, she didn't reach for her phone to create another excuse to look away. She only stared at the glowing stove, the text still visible on the screen from earlier, waiting a step farther ahead than she wanted, but not moving toward it. She set the table in the living room while Mason ushered the kids outside, the sound of their boots crunching dew through the open back door. Mason brought back a pair of marshmallow skewers he promised to roast later, and the kids cheered, their excitement echoing off the walls. It barely filled the space left by her withdrawal, but it was real, a small light in the growing dusk of their marriage. Lena slid the phone into her pocket, the conversation with the other person over. The empty silence of that absence now pressing against her even harder than the distance in the room. The counter filled with open jars and sharp knives. But Lena ignored the salad for a second to press a new sticky note beside the stove. Bring it up before bed. Her pen scrapped the paper until the words looked desperate. She slid the note so Mason would see it when he crossed the kitchen in a few breaths. The kids jabbered in the living room, turning the day toward bedtime, and the clock above the sink read 8:14. Every tick felt like sand, slipping through a neck that no longer belonged to them both. Mason appeared in the doorway with a dish towel slung over his shoulder, his eyes snagged on the neon square. You want to talk? He asked, not letting his voice rise but thick enough to sting. He set the towel down, planted his palms on the counter, and leaned toward her. Yes, Lena said, her voice small enough to disappear if he backed away. Before the kids are in bed. Tonight. You could have said that any night this week, he replied, barely watching the pasta boil. But you let nights pass in silence. She slid the note into his field of vision and then steeled herself. Silence bought time. But I'm out of it. If we ride another day like this, I don't know when we'll stop being strangers. Her fingers twitched around the wooden spoon, tapping the bowl like it might answer for her. He inhaled sharply, the towel creaking between his knuckles. Trust isn't a bridge you walk back across with a single apology, he said, each word landing as if he'd measured the distance. I need to see you showing up for it. No more later. There won't be later. I'm clearing the schedule. No extra hours at the studio, no extra nights pretending the kids' stories are enough. We start with dinner tonight. And I'm here when you're ready to say how we move forward. Her jaw clenched. She didn't let herself look at the clock. He searched her face, looking for the old anchor. And if I ask what that means? Come downstairs after you clean up the mess we made tonight. I'll be on the couch with the list I've been hiding. Her voice steadied as she grabbed a marker from a drawer and marked Saturday at 5 p.m. on the meal planner. An action that might have meant nothing before. But now it meant she was staking a claim on time. Mason rubbed his temples. Fine. But the kids eat with us, and no excuses this time. She nodded, taste of metal still on her tongue from suppressed words. He turned toward the sink, and she followed with a dish towel, unwinding a thread of tension into action. Mason rinsed a plate, then reached for the salad bowl when she held it out. Their hands brushed briefly, a touch that had once been warm but now crackled with static. Maybe we take that drive tomorrow, Mason said suddenly, eyes on the plate. Just us and the kids, no screens. Okay, Lena answered, the silence that followed tasting like a small victory. An agreement not yet heavy with apology, but buoyed by movement. I'll put the cooler in the car. You can pick the songs. The kids' laughter floated from the living room, a reminder of the stakes. Lena folded the towel, the fabric forming sharp creases, and slid it over the counter edge. Each crease was a promise, not enough to rebuild trust, but enough to start clearing space for the conversation she had scheduled for tonight. Mason wiped his hands on the towel, paused, and then pressed his palm briefly against the counter where her notes waited. Tonight, he said. Softer now, soon replaced by the clatter of plates, and the kids marched toward bedtime. The tension didn't vanish, but the decision to speak, to stay, to plan a drive together paid off with a shared plan instead of more distance. The kettle finished its last hum, and Lena slid the lid back on the coffee pot before setting it aside without pouring a cup. The kids were asleep upstairs, and the house held the kind of quiet that made every creak loud. She set her palms flat on the coffee table, fingers brushing the sticky note where she had written, Tonight, no excuses. Mason sat opposite her, elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the soft glow of the TV, even though it was off. His shoulders didn't move when she said, I don't have anything left to hide. The confession spilled out without a pause. She named the city where it happened, the night that should have been their anniversary, the way she had leaned into someone else's laugh because she was scared to face the silence between them. She didn't soften the edges. She said, I kept saying later, and there never was a later. As she spoke, Mason's hands clenched, then unfolded. He didn't cut her off, didn't ask for details. He stood, muttered something about needing air, and slid out of the room without meeting her eyes. He returned with nothing but a wrapped blanket, which he dropped across the arm of the couch where he used to fall asleep watching football. His wedding band sat on the coffee table as if it had just been set down in passing. But he let it stay there. When Lena reached for his wrist, he stepped back, his shoulders tightening, then walked toward the hallway. Before he closed his bedroom door, he paused, looked at her once, and said only, I need to be alone, before it clicked shut. Lena stayed where she was, fingers tracing the edge of the sticky note now stuck to the table. The truth had been spoken. Mason's silence filled the room, and the distance between them became a groove she could map with her eyes. She didn't try to follow him. Instead, she stood, picked up the coffee pot, and poured the water down the sink, listening to the steady rush of the drain like it might drown out the hush behind the bedroom door. She knew he heard every word. That was the only reward she allowed herself, seeing the outline of her confession hanging in the air and knowing it couldn't be unspoken. Steam from dishes creeps to ceiling, sticky notes drooping on the refrigerator with their pleas unspoken, the unused coffee swirling thinly in the sink. Mason's footsteps across the porch board are measured, the ring still gleaming on the table. A pale promise he did not reclaim. He does not look back. The porch light stays off, the night folding him into the road. The car door slams, a sound like finality, wheels humming away as surely as any tide. Upstairs, the twin night lights spill over mattresses, where their sleeping shapes have not been called down tonight. And the stairwell echoes with absence. She watches from the threshold, shoulders rising and falling, the weight in her chest settling into bone. The kitchen waits, the meal planner still marked with tonight's name and other nights now empty. A sticky note flutters loose, drifting onto the floor like a fallen petal, and she lets it lie there without reaching. In the quiet that follows, the house breathes a low sigh of decay. Its wallpaper crinkles where damp has begun, the legacy of their silence already staining the air. And there is no door swinging back open, no hand reaching through the dark to forgive or reclaim what the affair left in ruin.